morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to another episode of the Non-Identity podcast. Now, today we're joined by a very special guest. He started life on the streets of the Bronx in New York and spent nearly a decade in prison, but he's now on a great mission. He's turned his life around and he's doing so much work for the young people of Indianapolis with Victory in the City. It's Danny. Hi, Danny. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me on today.
Before we get into Victory in the City, as I mentioned in the intro, you did start in New York and you did get into gangs. How did that all come about?
Yeah, so let me begin the story by sharing that I was abandoned as a child. Like my mom, she literally left me and ended up in Norway. From New York City, ended up in Norway. My dad, that dude can only think about injecting drugs up his veins. And so he was, just a product of his environment. He ended up making a lot of bad decisions, which left me and my sister in a home by ourselves. We would literally stay there for hours upon hours, no food or anything like that, until one day a family learned about our situation and effectively brought us into their home. And so my mom, she disappeared. My dad was more concerned about drugs. So I ended up in a home with some gracious people that really did their best to love me well and to point me in the right direction. However, growing up in that home in the Bronx, New York, I was born, by the way, in 1980, and and when I got abandoned, I was about 18 months. So just for some context, so I grew up in a home that effectively was not my own home. And so my siblings, they would say things like, "You ain't a part of this family. You ain't blood." And that would make me feel a certain kind of way. And so long story short, despite the love that my parents had for me and the way they did their best to help point me in the right direction, I still felt a void in my heart. And I really never could figure out how to process that void. I didn't even know it was a void until I got older, a little bit more wiser and mature, right? And so I got to a point where I realized that I just knew that it wasn't okay for me to stay just hanging around the home dealing with that kind of stuff. So I ended up embracing the streets. So while on the streets, I just became a product of my environment there as well. And so I learned the code of the streets. I learned what it meant to, hold guns and what it meant to sell drugs, and just made a series of bad decisions, Lee, that had me facing eventually 45 years of my life in prison.
Wow. With being on the streets, that when you like selling the drugs and that, you had a purpose in life. Did you feel angry with the world at the time because of what happened to you, and it gave you a purpose? What was going through your mind at the time to the reason why you was making them choices?
Yeah, I can tell you right now that I didn't know I had a purpose.
Right.
I didn't think that I had a purpose. In fact, I was just living from one day to the next. I was literally in survival mode.
Right, okay.
I didn't care about myself. I didn't care about the people around me. I just didn't have people in my life pouring into me, giving me a sense of direction. I never had that in my life. What I did have in my life was villains, community villains that would take the time to teach me how to sell crack.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How to sell drugs and so forth. So I had those kinds of people in my life that were taking the time to invest in me. And
because they could get something out of you. So they were using you. So they was using you in a way because they could get something out of you by investing their time into you.
Absolutely. So I didn't know what my purpose was. I had no sense of hope. I had no idea. I could not look into my future. In fact, I lived on 136th Street in Willis Avenue. That's in the South Bronx. And I could not see past my corner. That was my life. I could not see past that. I didn't realize that the world was bigger than the block that I was standing on, or, you know, in the community that I was living in. And so as a result, I made a lot of bad decisions, and I'm not proud of them, but I share this with you, Lee, today to let you know that I came from a really dark place, and I'm glad to say today that I'm not in that dark place anymore. And for those of people that may be listening that may find themselves in a dark place, a moment in their life where they're trying to figure out, they don't know, I'm telling you today that there's hope. There's real hope at the end of this. And so, and we'll get into that a little bit as I share and disclose a little bit more of my story.
You said you was facing 45 years in prison. What event led that to happen?
Yeah, so okay. What events led to that happening? I'm going to try not to incriminate myself any further, but I was on a robbery spree. I was with another friend of mine, and we were just recklessly looking for money. We were doing it for fun, and we would rob pedestrians, we would rob gas stations, we would rob, invade homes, and I'm saying that with hesitation, if I'm honest right now, because as I think about it in my current state, I'm like, how dumb I used to be. What bad decisions I used to make. But in any event, this was the lifestyle that I was leading. So long story short, we ended up going into a studio, robbing the studio. The guy that was in there, he unfortunately was brutalized, and we ended up leaving with the property, all of the studio equipment, and then eventually getting arrested in Queens, New York. I'll never forget. I am unloading the equipment from the vehicle, and then all of a sudden the cops showed up, unmarked. They had regular clothes on and said, "Freeze." As soon as they said freeze, I was like, you think I froze, Lee? I didn't freeze. I was out of there. I jumped over the vehicle. I went into a house. I had guns on me, so we dropped the guns off. There was drugs in the house. Went through the back door, slammed the back door, jumped the fence, and ended up in somebody else's house in the basement. Long story short, cops are everywhere. They're looking, they're searching the grounds. There's helicopters outside, and so they made a connection because the house that I went into was my co-defendant's mother, my co-defendant's wife's grandmother.
Wow.
So what happened was my co-defendant's wife had a daughter together. So because she was in the house when we ran through it, she got arrested because the guns and the drugs were in there. She had nothing to do with it, but she got arrested. So now her daughter had to go somewhere, or she was going to get taken to, to another family or something. So she said, let me take it to my grandmother. So they made the connection. They realized that we may be in that house. Wow. So they got a warrant. They went into the house with big guns, right? And I'm over here hiding and everything. And then all of a sudden they finally, long story short, they found me. But not only did they find me, they found my co-defendant, and her grandmother happened to be in the room at the same time. And here's what happened, Lee. They didn't only put me in cuffs. They didn't only put him in cuffs. They took his grandmother, put her in handcuffs, and threw her on the bed. And that moment, I realized that my bad decisions were not only affecting me, they were affecting the innocent people around me as well. I said, leave her alone. She ain't got nothing to do with this. You know what they did? They kicked me in my face. They kicked me in my chest. They said, shut up. And there was nothing I could do. So long story short, they finally did the rest of their searching. They got me off of the floor, walked me upstairs, took me out, and I'm outside. I was sweating from all of the, the running and all that kind of stuff. I step outside, I could feel like this rush of cool wind hit my face, and then I hear the helicopter top. I see all the lights from the police cars and everything going off, and I knew right then and there that my life, as I knew it, was over.
At the time you was committing these offences and that, was you thinking about the victims, or was you in a very selfish mindset and it was all about you and what you wanted and what you could get?
I think if I'm most honest, It was absolutely rooted in selfishness. See, I didn't care about the world at this point. I felt like I had been rejected by my mom. I had been rejected by my dad. I had been rejected to a certain degree by my family that raised me.
Yeah.
So at this point, I just had bitterness in my heart. And I felt like a lot of the things that I was doing was triggered by the trauma that I experienced growing up. And so I'm sad to say that I was not thinking about the health and well-being of other people out there on those streets making bad decisions like that. You know, that's just the reality, because I was so consumed by my own issues. I didn't care about nobody else. But don't get me wrong, I still had compassion,
Yeah.
and I felt bad for, you know, his grandmother, you know, my baby, my co-defendant's baby mama's grandmother.
Family. Yeah.
I felt really bad for her because I knew that she had nothing to do with this, and she was, you know, she was innocent and she was tender and older in age, and like I'm like, no, that's not okay. So don't get me wrong, I had compassion to a certain degree, but at the same time, I was living a reckless life, really not caring about what other people thought. I just did what I did because, again, I had no hope. I had no sense of direction. And I came to the point in my life where I was ready to give up. I said, I'm done. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to survive. That's kind of how I felt.
Was you scared of dying or being killed on the streets?
No, I wasn't. I was not. In fact, I always had the mentality that I was not going to be the victim.
Right.
You know, and I was going to do, you know, like I never had the fear of dying or the fear of, I don't know why, but I just never had that inside me. I ended up you know, when I got locked up, they took me in the cop car, they sent me into the jail, got processed and all that. And I could tell you all about the system, like how I had to sleep on a toilet paper, you know, on a dirty, nasty floor. And I could tell you about the roaches that were everywhere and all that kind of stuff, the nastiness that was associated with prison or jail life at that time. It wasn't prison, it was jail. But I will tell you this. After experiencing all of the processing and getting convicted, not so much convicted, but I forget what you call it, whenever they do the preliminary hearings and all that kind of stuff. While I was going through that process, they had me transferring from one facility to another facility. I was in Rikers Island, which is a notorious jail in New York City. And they transferred me from there to another prison in Nassau County, which is in Long Island. And that was when something happened to me, Lee.
Yeah.
Something that absolutely revolutionized my heart. It was a moment that I was in my cell. Remember, I'm facing 45 years of my life in prison. I don't know what to think about what my future holds in terms of all that time. And then I remember getting down on my knees and praying. And I remember while I was praying, I was trying to remember the God that my mom used to try to teach me about. So I was in a moment of desperation. And I said, this is the only hope that I have here. So I remember getting on my knees, and I remember genuinely feeling awful about every single thing that I had done. And I was broken. I had no sense of hope at that moment. Anyway, long story short, as I'm sitting down in my cell reflecting on my behavior, you know, I'm processing everything that I did, a memory came to my mind of a person that I robbed. I approached this guy. I put the gun to his face. I demanded his money, and he resisted. So I pistol whipped him. I took the gun and I hit him across the face, and blood is gushing everywhere. And eventually, you know what this dude does? He looks me right in my eyes. He steps back. You know what he says to me? May God bless you.
Wow.
I cannot believe that this man chose to speak life into my corpse. I was a dead man walking, but he chose to speak life into me.
Yeah.
And so at that moment, I could not escape his words. His words are rotating relentlessly in my mind. May God bless you. May God bless you. May God bless you. And Lee, that broke me. I got down on my knees and I began wailing inside of that cell. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And talk about mental health. I was feeling like I was going crazy in that cell. And so I remember when I got off of my knees, Lee, I wiped away my tears and I got on my feet and I stretched a little bit. For the first time in my life, Lee, I felt free.
Wow. So
let me tell you, I'm here facing all this time.
Locked in a little room.
I found freedom in a prison cell.
Wow. That's crazy. It's just, yeah, man, at the point. So it's like you got to rock bottom knowing your life was over. That man at that time, he must have been terrified. And he still had the heart to sort of, in a way, forgive you for what you was doing at that time.
And that's exactly what he did. He forgave me right then and there.
Yeah.
That's unimaginable.
Exactly.
Like, who does that? He did it. And it changed my life.
It
changed my life.
Have you
I'm not the same that I used to be because this man, he chose to forgive me right then and there.
Have you ever got in contact back with that man again, or?
Nope, I cannot say that I have. I have written stuff. I've shared my story. I don't know if it's in the Lord's plan. If God wills that happens, I'm willing and ready to look him in the eye and say I'm sorry. And I know that my apology holds very little weight, but I want him to know that his words made a difference in my life. I'm no longer, his words took a hoodlum off of the streets and now is making a difference in the same kind of communities that I once helped destroy. I'm now, by God's grace, starting to help make a difference in those same kind of communities because of what he said.
Well, that's amazing. So you realised at that moment that it was sort of time for a change. How did you go about the rebuild of yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. I think the most important way, well, there are two things. Number one, you remember how I told you that the police ran up on me and they finally caught me? Well, in essence, I surrendered, right? I ran, but eventually they caught me and I had no choice but to surrender.
Yeah.
So in a very similar fashion, I surrendered my life to God.
Yeah.
And I made a decision that I'm not going to try to do this on my own anymore. I'm going to give God a shot. And I'll never forget, I remember I said, God, if you real, I need you to speak to me. And I'll never forget, I'm in Rikers Island and I get out of my cell and I go onto the unit and I get a chair and I get on my knees and I remember opening up the Bible and I landed on a verse in Ephesians chapter 4 where it says, those of you who stole, steal no more, or rather work with your hands so you could give to those who have a need. Now, I know that verse, Lee, is not a relevant verse for a lot of people. But for me, it was very clear that after I prayed that prayer, God, if you real, I need you to speak to me, that God was speaking to me right through his word. And so it was that moment that I gave every fiber of my being to the Lord. So that's number one. Yeah. But the flip side to that coin was I knew at that moment in my life, I needed education.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me tell you, man, I went into prison with a 4th grade reading level. Everything that I communicated was in broken sentences and cusses. I used to cuss like a pirate. I didn't have vocabulary. I could not express myself. In fact, I would often get into all kinds of fights. My aggression would arise because I used to feel like people were treating me like I was stupid or dumb or something. So I'd be like, oh, really? and then I would act out my aggression that way. You see? And so, long story short, I knew going into prison with a 4th grade reading level, I needed to change the way I thought.
Yeah.
Right? I needed to give myself more information. So I went to school and I started trying to get my GED. And I never forget, the teacher, one teacher said something to the effect of, you got to read more. You got to read more. And I'm like, I am reading. And he said, what are you reading? Give me some authors, some names of books you're reading. I said, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he's like, no, don't read that. And I'm like, no, I'm reading the Bible because it got a lot of big words and I'm learning a lot from it. And let me tell you, Lee, this is maybe not everybody else's story, but I stuck with the Bible. And the more I read the Bible, the more I grew in my knowledge and wisdom. And long story short, in about 10 months, I ended up acquiring my GED.
Wow.
Say hi to the cat. You see my cat?
Oh, hello. I catch somewhere around here.
Call him Kimbo Slice.
Oh.
So
I think that point, just in life in general, before people make choices, I think it's about gathering information, educating yourself on anything before you make a formed decision. And I think that's a lot of things with just anything that's going on in the world. People don't have enough information. They form an opinion without knowing all the facts. And I think what you're saying about the education side of things is vital for anything in life. Get the information first before you make your decision.
Exactly. I think that we oftentimes make a lot of decisions, and oftentimes they're bad decisions because we don't have accurate or adequate information.
Exactly. I totally agree.
Here's something I will say, that information by itself does not have the power to transform you.
Yeah.
Like, for example, we know that smoking cigarettes will kill us.
Yeah.
But does that information change us?
Not everyone knows.
Not everyone, right? We know that overeating, it will do something to us. Do we continue to overeat? I can say yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking from personal experience, right? So what I'm saying to you is that knowledge and information by itself doesn't have the power to change you in and of itself. Coupled, in my opinion, with faith and anchored in faith in God is what creates the transformation, because now you have the information. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? Before, I had no moral compass. Before, I was like a balloon, a helium balloon just floating around in life. I was bound to crash into something and burst. Yeah. But now I can say that I'm anchored in something. I'm rooted in something. And because I'm rooted in my faith and I have the information that I need to start making better decisions, I can start to experience moments of transformation. And all of it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a process. It's a little bit of a process to see real, genuine transformation. And such is the case for me. The truth is that I'm still dealing with childhood trauma. Yeah. To this day, I'm 41 years old, okay? And I got locked up when I was 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. And to this day, I'm still dealing with stuff. See what I mean? And I guess what I'm saying to you is that this is real life for me, right? I mean, I'm not, I could sit here and act like my life is completely transformed, and there has been a very transformative experience in my life, but I'm still working things out in my life. So I'm sharing this for the person that's listening, that, is looking at this like, oh, this dude think he's bad, he's good. And the truth is that I got issues that I'm still working through, but it's my faith in God that helps sustain me, that helps keep me focused, that helps keep me making right decisions with the information that I got.
So I was just going to ask you, is there any times where temptation slips back in, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I think that everyone is tempted in different ways. And my temptations that I used to have are no longer the same. So what I mean by that is that before, the life that I was living, I was gravitating to certain things that I would be tempted by. But because I'm no longer connected to that life anymore, I've chosen to separate myself from those things. The things in that world don't tempt me anymore. In other words, like I'm not tempted to smoke weed like I used to. Right? I'm more tempted by a pound of chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Like seriously.
We all are. I believe you.
I'm serious. And I say that because I want that chocolate cake after I just finished leaving a restaurant and filling myself to the point that I can't even breathe. And it's still tempting for me. So how do I do it? How do I deal with it? The question for me that I'm always asking is, what I'm going to put in my mouth, is it going to benefit me or is it going to destroy me? So the way I deal with my temptation is I'm asking internal questions. Am I gonna continue to indulge? And if I'm honest, there's times that I'm like, oh yeah, just one bite. And other times I'm like, I'm eating the whole thing. But there's other times that I have the discipline to say, I'm not doing this because it's destroying my body. And if my body is not healthy, I'm not going to be healthy enough to continue to serve other people.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I'm, constantly processing in my head, in my heart, because at the end of the day, when it comes to temptations, I have to be willing to exercise the discipline that's necessary to resist it. One thing that I would say to you is that if I'm really connected to the Lord, if I'm spending quality time in his presence and I'm constantly just doing, just spending time in his presence, temptations are not going to be as tempting to me. But if I'm away from his presence, those things are going to rise up and I'm probably going to fail and fall if I'm outside of his presence. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So, Victory in the City, what is it about, and how did you get involved how did you become director of the whole project?
Yeah. So Victory in the City, oh my gosh, what an incredible ministry that has just been created through a lot of time and a lot of brainstorming and processing and stuff like that. But it's definitely, when you hear me speak about it, know that it's not just me. It's a group of people that have sat down and thought through what it looks like to make a difference in an inner city context. So just to be fair and very clear, Victory in the City recently just came about, right? Like we put this together, we thought about how it all will work and so forth. But prior to working with Victory in the City, I was working for an organization called Central Indiana Youth for Christ. In that ministry, I learned so much. I was poured into, and I was given skills and just the ability to be able to reach and impact an immediate, the community that I'm living in, alongside of communities outside of my area. So long story short, after 6 years of doing ministry through Central Indiana Youth for Christ, I knew that the chapter in my life with Youth for Christ was closing, and I was about to step into the next chapter of my life. And this is where Victory Christian Church came into my life. They said to me, Danny, we want to invest in the vision that God has given you for the inner city. And I was so blown away by what they were willing and ready to do, that I was like, I prayed about it. I spent quality time with my wife and family, and I said, okay, let's do this. And so long story short, they brought me on staff to work with Victory Christian Church, and I'm leading Victory in the City, which is the mission work of Victory Christian Church in the inner city of Indianapolis. So what we get to do is we get to find and retain young people that are living in the immediate area and pour into their lives in so many different ways. We spend time building relationships with the young people. We spend time creating fun and exciting events with the young people. We spend time depositing different pieces of information that's going to help them make wise decisions. We have skill-based training in place that we are training young people how to gain a skill and take that skill into the workforce and so forth. And so, we get to spend quality time with teens, but not only with teens, my friend, we're engaging their parents as well. Oftentimes, our kids are forced to go back to the same place that they are trying to escape. So what we do is we don't only take a 11 to 19 or a young person approach. That's where we start. And where we start with the youth, we attract them, we pour into their life, we give them all kinds of cool opportunities. But through that experience, we tap into the family, we tap into the dad, we tap into mom, we tap into their siblings, and provide holistic ministry that helps take them out of survival mode into a state of thriving in their community.
So that's stuff that you're able to give to the community. What are the young people teaching you on a daily basis?
Oh, yes, they're teaching me patience.
Yeah.
They're teaching me TikTok. In all realness, one of the things that I learned from young people is that they want to show that they can lead.
Yeah.
I think a lot of old people, they have this tendency of looking at young people and saying, you're not old enough. You ain't ready yet. And I've seen differently. I've seen that when you give responsibility to a young person, they take it with pride. And they almost try to prove that they can do it. And that's exactly how I lead. I pull them into a situation. I say, okay, how would you handle this? And they begin to deal with it, and we process it together. You see, this is how it works for me, man. When I look at young people, I see exactly what they present. I see the fitted cap. I see the Jordans that they're wearing on their feet. I see the jewelry that they're wearing and all that kind of stuff. But I choose to see beyond all the surface stuff.
Yeah.
What I choose to do is I choose to call out their destiny. I see you as a leader. I see you as knocking this, like really killing it in this area. I see you taking this role of leadership over here or over there and so forth. I call out the best in them, even when they're messy. You know where I get that from, right?
Oh, man.
Man, I get that from learning from Jesus. That's exactly how Jesus did it. He looked at Peter, for example. If you look at the story, when he first met Peter, right, he looked at him intently and he saw who Simon was. And he said, today, I call you Peter. I call you a rock. I call you something stable, something firm. I see past the sliminess in your life, but I see something firm today. And so I guess what I'm saying to you is that Jesus called out Peter's destiny right then and there. And that's how we choose to operate in our ministry. We call out the destiny of the young people and their families that we are engaging every day.
I think that's really a good message, because I think as human nature, we just want people to believe in us. And society, I don't know about where you are, but over here in England a lot, everyone wants to kick you when you're down and stuff and keep you there. Where if you just had someone behind you just to say, no, you can do it, I think it just pushes people so much forward. And we've got to remember, the young people nowadays is our world's future. So if we keep them down now, that's the way the world's going to end. Where if we can just encourage the young people to build and do something with their lives and lead, then we know the world's going to be in a greater place moving forward into the future.
That's so good. Let me tell you, man, that's part of the reason, Lee, that I share my story.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I speak to that have a similar story, they're almost hesitant to share their story because they feel that people are going to look at them like down and see them as, but I'm sharing my story with the world because they need to know that, yeah, you could be in a dark place. You could have hit rock bottom. But I am a living testimony to the fact that you can get back up again. And that is not your whole story. There is more to your story. And I refuse to see a young person or their family member get kicked down to the ground and stay there. It behooves me and it behooves you to stretch out your arm and say, come on, let's get up. Let's go.
I totally agree. But we're coming to the end, sadly. It's been a great interview, but I'm going to ask you a question I ask everyone. So this answer will not change your life journey so far, but if you had 30 seconds with your 13-year-old self, what would you say?
Stop being an idiot. Don't be arrogant. Listen to people. Oh my gosh, I would say all kinds of stuff. Stop acting like you got everything figured out. Listen, learn, get your education. Hey, Lee, you asked a question that I could go on for hours talking about. I would tell my 13-year-old self.
It's been great. And we'll put some links down to your YouTube channel and social media stuff if people want to know more about Victory in the City. And hopefully in the future, fingers crossed, when I come over to America, I'd love to come and visit Victory in the City.
Dude, I would love to give you a tour of our community and all that. And same goes for you. If I'm ever in London,
please do.
Like, yo, Lee, where you at, dude?
Please do. No, thanks, Danny. It's been lovely speaking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, you have a good one, buddy.